The Sony Xperia 5 Mark II and the iPhone SE 2020. Two powerful, well-built devices. But what happens when you steer away from the tech spec and benchmark focus tests typically used to describe these phones? This review is less Snapdragon 865 versus A13 Bionic and more practical experience and questioning which elements of these phones might be moronic. I've been living with these two phones for a while now. So sit right back, grab a nice drink, and let me tell you the Inktelligent perspective on two of the smaller high-end smartphones currently available. This is the Inktelligent review of the Xperia 5 Mark II versus the iPhone SE 2020. The Xperia 5 Mark II measures in at 158mm by 68mm by 8mm and is 163 grams in weight. The phone is a bit of a chameleon in this regard. If you're coming from a small phone like an iPhone 6, 6S, 7 or 8, then it will probably feel like a big phone to you. At first, anyway. If you're coming from a bigger phone, like a Galaxy Note or pretty much any phone ending in Ultra, Max or Pro, then there's a good chance you'll feel like this is a smaller phone. This means that those previously using big phones will probably adjust better to actually holding and handling the phone. Coming from a smaller iPhone myself, my muscle memory had a bit of a tough time handling the phone, especially because of the numerous reachability issues. It always felt like I was having to shuffle the whole phone around in my hand to really use the device. And that's because I was. If you try this with the Xperia without putting it in a case, be warned, the slippery glass finish will mean you'll probably have at least one terrifying moment of almost dropped the phone-itis. So, has Sony provided any workarounds to these issues? I think it's fair to say they gave it a shot. Sony does include a one-handed mode. This is accessible via double-tapping the side of the Xperia and opening what Sony calls SideSense. There you can select this mode to diagonally shrink the screen. Admittedly, this is a neat option, and you can significantly resize the screen and even move it around somewhat. It's also cool that, once in this mode, you can make a shortcut back to one-handed mode via a double tap of the virtual home button at the bottom of the screen. However, if you're thinking that you'll just use this mode all the time and exit it when you want to watch videos or read an article, you may be disappointed. That's because the screen reverts to normal once you lock the device. Yes, you can activate it by tapping the home button when you unlock the phone, if you set this up beforehand, but in my experience, that can get irritating pretty quickly. The fact that Sony bothered to include this mode may evoke praise and ridicule at the same time. It's a nice feature, but if Sony felt people might have trouble using a phone this tall, then why not make the phone shorter to begin with? Only in the current era of the Max, Pro, and Ultra phones could the Xperia 5 Mark II be labeled a compact. The other thing working against the Xperia 5 Mark II in the size department is a journey you'll go on if you buy this phone. Something I like to call the quest for a case. Selection, at least at the moment, is limited. The other issue is that you'll probably be forced to choose between one of two design extremes. On the one hand, there's the official case for the phone made by Sony, which is stylish, has a built-in kickstand, and adds little bulk to the phone. But besides being expensive and very hard to find, leaves much of the phone exposed, which may be an issue if you actually drop it. On the other extreme, you have something like this case by Caseology. This case is certainly a bit more budget-friendly and fits the phone like an armored glove. But it does add considerable weight and width to the phone, in my opinion. These compromises, on either extreme, act to really limit the benefits of the phone's design. And, as I mentioned earlier, using the phone without a case probably isn't the best idea due to its slippery glass back. However, in my experience, the Sony case makes a huge difference in using the phone and reduces the overall weight of the device considerably. Having less material between phone and case made reachability that little bit better, and it made SideSense noticeably more easy to activate. However, given the starting price of this phone, let's be honest, this case should have come in the box. Thanks a lot, Sony. If you ever owned an iPhone 6, 6S, 7 or 8, you'll know roughly what to expect from the iPhone SE 2020's form factor. It is, currently, the second smallest iPhone available and measures in at 138.4mm by 67.3mm by 7.3mm. And weighs a pleasant 148 grams. At first, I found the SE 2020's dimensions, which are slightly wider than my previous iPhone 6S, to be a little off-putting in general use. I still think my one-handed typing is noticeably faster on the 6S. I also think that going for even this small increase in width was unnecessary, and when adding a case, this small increase is compounded. However, after a while, I found that I did get used to gripping it. After a day or two, I really started to remember the advantages of using a smaller phone. You can just grab the thing so easily because of its shorter and more symmetrical design. You can reach most areas of the screen with more ease and without the need for awkward reshuffling of a larger phone's weight in your hand. And, because even this form factor was considered a bit of a stretch when it first launched, Apple has again included the double tap of the home button shortcut to bring the screen downward for better accessibility. Yes, it is a little like Sony including a one-handed mode on a phone that was clearly not geared to one-handed use, but at least Apple still makes a smaller phone, so I give them some points for that. Although the SE is still a bit heavier than my old iPhone 6S, I did appreciate that it is nearly 20 grams lighter to carry around than the Xperia 5 Mark II. There were times where I carried both phones in a jacket, and the added weight of the Xperia made visible crease differences in how the thing fit. No joke, here's the footage. Yeah. Unlike the Xperia 5 Mark II, the iPhone SE 2020 will probably not pose too much difficulty in finding a case. You can buy several options direct from Apple online, like this black leather model, which is thin and lightweight, while still being fairly durable. Imagine that, being able to order a phone itself and its own branded case from the company's own website directly. Come on, Sony. Get with the program. And because the iPhone has seemingly won the global popularity contest among phones, you'll no doubt be able to find many more case options in stores and online. The Xperia 5 Mark II takes a pretty unique approach to the whole idea of a SIM tray, in that you don't need any pin or special key to eject it from the phone. One can simply extract it using their fingernails. Some of you out there might be wondering whether you need to worry about your SIM card tray falling out of the device if it drops. This might be an issue if the phone lands in a particular way or is dropped fairly hard, but from my experience, Sony did a great job in making this SIM card tray stay put. It also has a small rubber gasket around the edge to help keep water out. Pop out the Xperia SIM tray and you'll not only see the usual space for your primary SIM card, but also a secondary dual-use slot. Cleverly, Sony has engineered this slot so you can either choose to place a second SIM card inside it, or a microSD card to expand the storage capacity of the phone. That's pretty neat. In terms of base storage, the Xperia is available with a default storage of either 128 or 256 gigabytes. However, I haven't personally seen the 256GB version offered much in North America. Other markets might be the principal beneficiaries of this enhanced storage. But thanks to having that handy microSD card slot built in, if you feel you need more, you can add it. This is impressive, as it means, in theory, due to microSD card storage options these days, that you can upgrade the total memory capacity of the phone, depending on the model, up to 1.256 terabytes of storage. Of course, microSD cards aren't included in the box, so the downside is that you'd have to upgrade the phone at extra expense. What's new, Sony? The iPhone SE 2020 offers a single physical SIM card storage slot. Unlike the Xperia, the iPhone SE does require you to use a special key that comes with the device to eject the SIM card. Now, I can't be totally sure about this, but this doesn't feel as easy as it used to on my older iPhones, and I really start to feel nervous with how much pressure I need to exert on the small SIM ejector hole and the flimsy feeling metal key to accomplish this. I think Apple needs to improve this going forward if this isn't a problem exclusive to this particular iPhone unit. Have you experienced this with your iPhone SE? Put a comment down in the comments section below. An important point to drive home is that the iPhone SE 2020 is technically a dual SIM phone, but while there's one traditional nano SIM card slot which allows you to eject and swap a SIM card in and out like usual, The second SIM card is actually an eSIM card, which is physically built into the phone itself and cannot be physically removed. Essentially, the eSIM is something you have to ask a mobile phone carrier to activate for you. There are several videos on YouTube regarding eSIM activation, so you can go and check those out if you're interested. Personally, eSIMs aren't really my cup of tea, and I think the Xperia's physical dual SIM card capability is a better idea, and I also think this gives the user more freedom in general. In terms of storage, the iPhone SE is available with 64, 128, or 256 gigabytes of storage. Unlike the Xperia 5 Mark II, this storage is not expandable, so you'll have to make sure to choose the right level of storage when purchasing the device. Thankfully, these options should probably suit most people's needs. My smartphone experience thus far has largely been based within the Apple ecosystem. That means that I'm coming at this part of the comparison with a familiarity with iOS. Anyway, my point is that I'm not what you'd call a power Android user by any means, so these impressions of my experience with Android running on the Xperia 5 Mark II are coming from someone who only has a moderate familiarity with that operating system. Android OS on the Xperia 5 Mark II is generally pretty smooth. Apps open quickly and almost everything is pretty fast. My main gripe with Android is just how it feels. No, I'm not referencing the dull buzzes you get when tapping on options versus the more nuanced and varied vibrations Apple achieves with its Taptic engine in the iPhone, but that's part of it too. Android just feels a little blah to me. Very coder, very boilerplate, very off-the-shelf, cold. Menus are dense and kind of boring to look at. Compare this to Apple's menus, which, frankly, are also boring to look at, but at least they often include lines dividing the options and frequently have some kind of colorful icon beside it to jazz things up a bit, or at least indicate blank space with a slightly different color. I understand Android might be going for a more uncluttered, quote-unquote look, but I just don't dig this kind of minimalism in a phone interface I might be using every day. My next gripe comes from the default icon size on the apps on the phone. Sure, they look neat and tidy and crisp, but just look at how tiny these apps are. They're as small, or maybe even slightly smaller, than a standard USB-C connector head. Sony, why on earth are these apps so very, very small on such a very, very big phone? I think Sony must have been trying to save space on the device's screen or maximize the amount of apps a user can place on the screen at once or something, but I can't really fathom why. For one thing, a person can add several app pages that they can swipe between, or they can just swipe up on the screen to access the app drawer. I would have appreciated Sony including some kind of method to resize these app icons on the device, but I haven't found any option to do this. Yes, one can download apps from the Google Play Store to do this, but judging from some of the customer reviews out there, you might be taking your chances if you do. More on that a bit later. The main thing I always disliked about using Android is that it just never felt like there was a minute that went by without the OS analyzing everything I did. I don't have concrete proof that it was, of course, but this is more of a feeling based on my knowledge of Google's general business practices. The sheer number of options I felt I had to turn off before even really using the phone was one major impediment to me being able to really trust this device. I know that's Google and that's how they make their money, and I know some of you will disagree and feel that Google's mission of getting to know each and every one of us better might make some things more convenient. I do understand all that. But coming from an era where I felt fairly secure that my phone wasn't watching and logging my activity on it 24/7, the current state of Android will always feel a little Orwellian to me, just like the current state of home smart speakers. I'm looking at you, Amazon. For those who are used to previous versions of iOS, the jump to iOS 14.0 and higher does bring a bevy of new features. However, I'll only be noting ones that I found really jumped out at me in everyday use. For example, for those concerned about privacy, there's a neat little feature where the green dot will appear in the top right-hand corner of the screen every time your phone's camera is active. This dot changes to a small orange dot when your microphone is engaged. To those who are coming from an Android phone, you may be pleased to note that Apple has added some support for widgets, which you can now place on the home screen. Although, true to Apple's tendency to control things, you can't place these just anywhere, for some odd reason. You also now have the ability to use what Apple calls smart stacks, where you can essentially stack certain widgets on top of each other and then scroll through these. It's a nice space-saving feature, and especially on a smaller screen model of the iPhone like the iPhone 2020 SE. There's also the added App Library function, which finally allows iPhone users the convenience of seeing all their apps at a glance. Overall, iOS seemed about as responsive and easy to navigate as the version I had previously used, but there definitely are some downsides. For one, creation of folders or app collections on the device is still more cumbersome than it needs to be. You first have to press down at some point on the home screen until all the icons begin to jiggle. Then you need to tap an app that you'd like to be in that folder and hold it down while moving it over another app, but you need to get the positioning just right for the encompassing folder to form. This maneuver has a pleasing and interesting look, but even if your hands are slightly oily, this can be a chore on the slippery glass screen. Also, if you don't get the positioning right, apps tend to move out of your way. There's also the fact that you have to do the whole maneuver in one single press of the screen without lifting your finger, or the app retreats back to its previous position on the screen. I think it would be great if Apple added some other way to do this. Here's an idea. What about simply allowing one to long press on the home screen to just create a folder that way? After that, you could select from a list of apps on the device you want to place inside it. I mean, wouldn't that be a nice option? Wouldn't that be just as simple and actually more straightforward? And Apple, if you agree, you could send me a check anytime. To be fair though, this app stacking folder creation method is also how you accomplish the task on Android. So I think it's a problem across both platforms that could use some attention. An important part of today's phones is the ability to enhance them with new content that you can download from an online store. Let's start with Android's main way of getting new apps for your device: Google Play. The word play, to me, should suggest an activity that's both fun and exciting. However, my experience with Google Play doesn't really meet that benchmark. Sure, it looks clean, it seemed easy enough to search, and there are plenty of apps to choose from. What's not to love? In a word, permissions. Look up almost any app on the Play Store, and then tap the small arrow beside About this app. Then scroll down to the bottom of the page to App Permissions, and then tap See More. You'll then be treated to a list of the various on-device permissions the app might request in order to work on your device. For example, an app might require access to your device's microphone, or hard drive storage, or location data. Now, to be fair, many times these requests are absolutely logical, and you can see why the app might need that permission to work on your phone. However, other times it raises some disturbing questions. For example, why might a wallpaper app need to have full network access on your phone? Or why would a voice recording app need access to your phone's list of contacts? Even when looking at the permissions requested by extremely popular apps like WhatsApp, the list can be pretty long. For some of these cases, there might well be legitimate reasons why the app requests seemingly odd permissions. But you're usually not told what that is. To me, anyway, this puts all the mental work of deciding whether an app is actually a privacy risk or, worse, on the user. Yes, you can restrict the permissions apps have on your phone, but then some of them may not function at all. So, to me, anyway, when I see Google Play, I ironically think of work. The utilitarian named App Store on the iPhone is, I feel, only marginally better in certain respects than Google Play. It too is fairly nicely laid out and easy to navigate and use. I will say that I do feel a bit quote-unquote safer using the App Store. This admittedly somewhat unscientific or data-based feeling may stem from several things. My familiarity with the App Store from the years using my older iPhone might be part of this. But Apple is also known for being a bit more choosy about which apps it allows onto its App Store platform. Yes, this doesn't automatically translate into a guarantee of better app safety for your phone, but it does indicate that more attention might be being paid to each app before it shows up for download on the store. With greater app scrutiny comes greater potential to spot security threats. Apple also deserves a small, maybe quite small, pat on the back for, in recent versions of iOS at any rate, placing a concise kind of privacy card on apps in its App Store, and putting this information right up front. This describes the data an app may collect from you and which may be able to be linked to your identity. Tapping on See Details will give you a slightly more in-depth listing of subcategories of data an app may be able to collect. And that's great. Apple sure looks like it's being responsible here, right? Well, you see, if you do tap on See Details, you might notice quite a big detail. For at least certain apps, Apple even states that it hasn't actually verified whether certain claims regarding what an app developer might do with data are true or not. What? What's the point of saying it, then? So I guess that's kind of a win and a loss for Apple on the App Store security front, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to say too much about the technical nitty-gritty of the camera system on either of these phones. Like I said, I want this review to be about the everyday usability of these devices and not a tech spec competition. The Xperia 5 Mark II features 3 rear cameras, all of which are rated at 12 megapixels. You get 1 wide angle, 1 normal, and 1 telephoto lens. Located on the front of the phone is an 8 megapixel camera. Various reviews out there have given the Xperia 5 Mark II rave reviews for its cameras, and given Sony's expertise in this area, it's tempting to think this. Sony did include some unique features. Specifically, the phone comes preloaded with Pro-labeled photography and videography apps. I will say that these apps are the closest I've come to an actual camera interface on a phone. You have an impressive variety of options that you aren't likely to find natively on any other smartphone. Seriously, on what other brand of phone are you likely to have the ability to fine-tune your white balance, activate on-screen guides like level bars and grids, and change your ISO values out of the box? Sony's lists of image use, such as Venice and others, may also add appeal to those with strong photography or videography backgrounds. However, the sheer amount of menus, submenus, and the quite technical look of the interface is likely to overwhelm those who are just familiar with basic auto modes on cameras. However, if you put the time into understanding these modes, there's a good chance you'll be rewarded. The normal camera app is definitely the most minimal in terms of options of the 3 camera apps on the phone, but is also likely to be the one most accessible to most people. Provided you have decent lighting, the photos you take here can turn out pretty good. However, I did notice that quite a few of the shots I took did turn out a bit fuzzy at times, and this was especially true in low lighting. I'll have a comparison example of photos produced by both phones coming up in a moment. The interface, though probably fairly familiar to Android and iOS users alike, seems a bit too cluttered to me. It's like I'm just too distracted by all the white icons to really think quickly about my composition and get the shot I'm looking for. This also probably isn't the camera for those who are thinking they just want to whip out the phone, press the camera button on the side, and be ready to take a few photos whenever they want. While this phone could serve that purpose, unless you unlock the phone first, the main camera app has an inactivity timer, which will simply shut down the main camera app after about 30 seconds of inactivity. You get a brief warning at about the 20-second mark, but then you need to tap one of the on-screen buttons or take a picture quickly to keep the app active. And yes, this even applies if you pressed on the dedicated camera button to activate the photo app. On a smartphone, ever since iPhones made swipe up and snap a thing, it just feels wrong to make people unlock the phone first if they want to take more than 30 seconds framing their shot. Although thankfully, since the Xperia's update to Android 11, this only seems to happen if you either access the main camera app before you unlock the phone screen, or, more disappointingly, use the phone's dedicated camera button at any time to enter the main photo app. Yes, even after the phone is unlocked. I know that bites, and it just should have never happened. Once unlocked, the camera app gives a much more generous window of time before it times out, and this also, mercifully, goes for the Photo and Cinema Pro apps as well. That said, there is absolutely no need for the inactivity feature, if you can call it that, on a phone with a 4000 milliamp battery. You gotta wonder what on earth they were thinking. One other quick thing. The camera button. I was really excited to hear that the Xperia 5 Mark II featured a dedicated camera button, a feature that I think more phones should really have. But then I actually held the Xperia in my hand. Now, I don't know too many people that habitually hold their phones like this, and that's pretty much how you would have to hold it if you wanted to activate it with a thumb using only one hand. And so pushing it, like so. So I mean, look at this. This is insane. Sony, no one would take a photo like this. And look, I mean, it's crazy, like most of the thing is hanging out of your hand. Oh, whoops, there it goes over the Grand Canyon. And then there's a camera inactivity, kind of hanging over you like some kind of drill sergeant and saying, oh, take the picture or else. Yes, I know, the argument can be made that Sony thought most people will tilt the phone sideways before pressing the camera button. But really, a lot of casual users don't frame their shots in landscape all the time. Don't get me wrong, it's great the button is there, allowing cool features like pressing the button down halfway to focus before taking your shot. But especially when you have the needless dedicated Google Assistant button, which cannot be remapped to any other function, sigh. Taking pride of place on the phone's side, you just have to shake your head and wonder why Sony did this. Those few millimeters of extra height would have been perfect for allowing much easier activation of the camera feature on this phone. The iPhone SE 2020 doesn't have the bells and whistles of Sony's pro-level camera apps, but does offer quite a few options. The device is also using a 12-megapixel rear-facing camera, while the front-facing camera is rated at 7 megapixels. Photos are certainly decent for most people's everyday use, and seem like an upgrade in quality from what my older iPhone 6s could manage. As per usual, the iPhone SE 2020 offers several dedicated shooting modes to choose from, and its time-tested slide-to-change mode interface seems much more welcoming than the Xperia's hidden menu system that takes a person into sub-modes. I also appreciated the less cluttered shooting interface on the iPhone. Although Apple has included several extra options like the ability to change the photo's aspect ratio, exposure settings, and others. Apple has also included a dedicated portrait mode, which is much more nuanced and detailed than any portrait mode you'll find on the Xperia, of which I have only found one for selfies, which demands access to certain permissions on your phone just to activate, and, in my opinion, frankly is kind of terrible. What you're seeing here is a series of side-by-side comparisons of both phones being used in their default main camera app. Now, neither camera here is actually bad. On the contrary, both devices produce generally great photos. That said, I don't think either were quite up to the quality you can get with a dedicated camera. Not even the Xperia, with all of its supposed input from Sony's Alpha series of cameras. However, I generally think both devices are quite strong at capturing balanced and pleasing images. I will say that I think they shine in different respects. You may notice, for example, that the iPhone SE 2020's photos tend to be a bit sharper and feature slightly better detail than images captured by the Xperia 5 Mark II. You may also have noticed that the Xperia 5 Mark II's photos might tend to have a slightly more rich or true-to-life color about them. Take, for example, this image taken indoors in fairly low light. This was the most extreme showcase of the differences between the two cameras I came across in my tests. Note that the iPhone's photo is less blurry in areas than the Xperia's photo on the right. Specifically, an impressive amount of detail has been captured on the texture of the wood, the details on the feathers of the wrapping paper, the clear tape used on the wrapping paper of the larger box, and the details on the metal handle below it. However, the Xperia's image, while more blurry, has done a better job of capturing what the lighting actually looked like in the scene at the time the photo was taken. This dichotomy of the iPhone generally having its strength in preserving better image detail, and the Xperia being stronger and having more appealing and mostly truer-to-life colors, seem to be the persistent dynamic throughout my image tests with these devices. So is either quote-unquote better than the other? That depends on what you're looking for. If you're someone who always wants sharp detail in a variety of lighting, the iPhone is probably more tailored to your use case. However, if you're someone who feels more appealing and color-accurate photos are the most important quality, the Xperia is likely the better bet. Do I have a favorite? I'd say it's not an easy choice, but I find I do generally prefer the Xperia's photos to the iPhone's. But that really is just a personal preference. I really do think that both these devices do quite a good job at taking photos. Oh, another point. Neither phone is a total slouch at shooting video either. This footage was shot in HD on both, but each has the ability to shoot 4K footage as well. Neither really seems to leave the other in the dust in the tests I've conducted. but I would say that the same strengths and weaknesses seen in their photos persist. Looking at paused frames of the footage from both devices, the iPhone has slightly better detail, while the Xperia's colors are more true to life and vibrant. This is especially true in the iPhone seeming to be more liberal in its application of red and yellow tones to most photos and footage, whereas the Xperia generally tends to balance these better with cooler blue tones in the images it produces. The Xperia 5 Mark II does let the user take slow motion videos, but it separates these out across two different apps. You have the main camera app, which allows the simplest method of selecting a slow motion mode on the device. However, in this shooting mode, you're limited to shooting at HD resolution. You also have the option of shooting up to 120 frames per second in slow motion at 4K resolution. But to do this, you have to go into the Cinema Pro app. The interface of this app may be a bit overwhelming, and it's not nearly as intuitive to activate this type of slow motion photography on the phone. The iPhone SE 2020's slow motion mode has fared quite decently in my usage. The feature is easy to access and have ready at a moment's notice. The iPhone SE can only shoot slow motion in HD resolution, but it can shoot at either 120 or 240 frames per second. So, which of these phones does slow motion better? In my opinion, one of the most crucial elements of doing slow motion well on a phone is how easy the phone lets you capture it. After all, the point of slow motion is to slow down something that is usually moving pretty fast. So that immediacy of letting you quickly tell the phone what you want it to do is very important here. In this respect, both phones are close. On a purely technical sense of how many actions it takes to get to shooting in slow motion, the Xperia 5 Mark II probably wins. However, I found that in practical use, the iPhone allowed me to get shooting footage more quickly. The main reason for this has very little to do with the camera interface on either phone, and more to do with the dimensions of the actual phone itself. The iPhone is just much more comfortable, in my opinion, to hold on to securely and to navigate the camera menu with one hand. This was especially true when filming in very wet weather conditions, where the bigger and heavier Xperia 5 Mark II combined with its very slippery glass construction made me feel less secure in handling it, and correspondingly was less quick to get into a slow motion shooting mode. The iPhone SE 2020 is also a slippery glass monolith, but it's a smaller monolith, one that I can more securely grip with more areas of my hand. Both the Xperia 5 Mark II and the iPhone SE 2020 produce decent-looking slow-motion footage. As you can see in this side-by-side comparison, there are times where the footage out of both can look significantly different. Here, both phones are capturing the same scene at 120 frames per second. I would, again, say that the two devices are shining in their usual respective photographic strengths. In this footage, the Xperia 5 Mark II has captured what I feel was a better sense of the scene's actual colors. You can probably see that the footage out of the iPhone SE 2020 is significantly more gold/yellow in tone. However, the iPhone does seem to be doing a better job at capturing the detail in the wet pavement and the ripples in the water. If you asked me to choose which footage I like better here, I don't think it's such a simple task. The color accuracy of the Xperia 5 Mark II is truly commendable in this low-light, stormy filming scenario, especially when I look at the more natural greens of the trees in the far background and the pavement in the foreground. However, even though the iPhone is imparting a somewhat enhanced gold tone to the image, I probably have to say it is the one with the most immediacy and draw, as the gold hue combined with the greater detail does lend a pleasing patina to the image. Where the iPhone seems to pull ahead is in the fact that it can also take slow motion video at a higher frame rate of 240 frames per second. Here's a sample of how the previous scene was captured by the iPhone SE 2020 filming at 240 frames per second. The increase in noticeable details in the shot is impressive, especially for quite low light conditions. The Xperia 5 Mark II doesn't feature a 240 frames per second slow motion option, but I'll say that its option of shooting at 120 frames per second at 4K resolution in the Cinema Pro app can render quite cinematic looking results. For reasons that I'll go into soon, getting this image to show you wasn't very easy. But even so, I still think this footage looks most impressive playing on the phone itself. See what I mean? Both the iPhone SE 2020 and the Xperia 5 Mark II offer significant image alteration modes. I won't talk about these too much, but the list of post-photo capture alterations available on each is quite impressive. Each of these devices support an auto enhancement mode, tools to control contrast, saturations, and sharpening, and even extensive cropping and image skew and de-skew tools. So I can't really say that either one of these phones really pulls ahead of the other in this regard. However, each is still unique in some respects. The iPhone SE has a fairly impressive selection of portrait modes which can be altered to some extent after the picture has been taken. While the Xperia has some features that could be handy to some, such as integrating the Google Lens image search tool as a main menu option when looking at your photos. Of course, how long your phone is going to last in your hand or in your pocket or backpack or wherever is very much dependent on its battery life. I have never been so impressed with the phone's battery life as I have when using the Sony Xperia 5 Mark II. Now you could say that's because I had primarily been using an older iPhone before, but I don't think that quite explains it. I have never used a phone which can quite consistently give me 2.5 to even 3 days of quite solid battery life. Yes, you heard that right. There were quite a few times where I got a full 3 days of battery life out of this device. More astonishingly, it often still had between 20 to 10% battery life when I plugged it in at the end of the third day. Remarkable. Okay, there are one or two catches, so to speak, regarding how it is that my Xperia 5 Mark II battery gets these incredible results. The first is that I'm not what you'd call a power user of the phone, and I don't do a lot of gaming on the device. Additionally, I'm not always on the phone, so I'd say that where I get about 3 solid days of battery life, then a power user might expect closer to either a full day's use or perhaps a day and a half. That's a guess and not scientific, but I hope it puts things in perspective. The second thing I did that may not be compatible with other phone users out there is that I made a point of disabling as much of what I call Google snoopware as I could find. This included things that many people like to leave on, like Google Assistant, location tracking, and a multitude of other settings. However, it's important to note that I never really missed any of these features. The closest to something that I think you could call a core feature that I was missing was location services being turned off. But really, for my use case, I didn't need it. Frankly, there's a good chance that you may not need that every day either. I was still able to make phone calls, send text messages, download apps, watch videos, surf the web, listen to music, use the cameras, play some light games, do pretty much everything you can normally do on an Android smartphone. The Xperia 5 Mark II comes with several modes that you can enable to extend the battery's overall lifetime. These modes can learn from your individual use and charging schedule for the phone, and can then take steps like taking a little longer to charge the phone to full after hitting 80% of capacity. It's nice to see a company put some effort into making sure their product can last longer for you. Good move, Sony. Good move. The iPhone SE's battery is both impressive and quite lackluster at the same time. Impressive because I was surprised at just how long its roughly 1821 mAh battery could actually last. Apple's legendary battery standby time at work. However, the iPhone SE has Apple essentially recycling the hardware design aesthetic of the iPhone 8, a design dating back to 2017. I would have expected a tech giant like Apple, who prides itself on innovation and always making new generations of its products better, to have actually worked on giving their consumers better battery life. I am pleased to say that if you're not a power user of the phone, you can probably expect to get a surprisingly long battery life out of it. The max I got was about 2 days of on time without a power top-up. Again though, I have to qualify that statement with the fact that I tend to turn off a lot of the settings that many people leave on, like Siri, pretty much everything in the Analytics and Improvement section, and I usually kept location services off. That 2-day mark also happened to coincide with extremely light use of the phone, even for my standards. Like I said, I don't consider myself a power user at all. Even with just location services on, even I was only able to get about a day of use out of the phone. Disappointing. I found that the phone's battery really struggled on voice over IP calls that you'd use through apps like Signal. To give you an example, I have in my notes that a Signal call I was on lasted 30 minutes with battery health dropping from 83% to 72% in that time. The iPhone SE 2020, like the Xperia 5 Mark II, claims to have a setting that allows the phone to learn from your individual charging habits. However, even with this mode on, in the relatively short time I've had the device, my phone's overall battery health has dropped to 98%. For only a few months usage, and not super high usage at that, I find that drop quite disappointing. To reduce battery aging, iPhone learns from your daily charging routine so it can wait to finish charging past 80% until you need to use it. That sounds great, Apple, but then what's this? Yeah, that. And ending on a positive note, a minor plus to some and a major plus to others is that, yes, the iPhone SE 2020 can also charge via wireless charging. I expected the Xperia 5 Mark II would have really excellent audio capabilities, but I'm conflicted on my real-world experience. I'm especially dismayed that Sony chose to only outfit the phone with very small microphone inputs. Accordingly, I had quite an inconsistent experience in making phone calls, especially of the speakerphone variety. Some people I tried calling, who were both iPhone users, reported no problem with hearing me. However, especially in the case of calling a Samsung Galaxy S20 user, I was consistently told that my audio was faint and that the microphone seemingly didn't pick up sound very well. This did change somewhat when I found and turned off the Intelligent Wind Filter feature in the settings. Besides being marginally insulted that the phone may have been taking my voice for wind, this meant that people remarked at better sound quality being picked up by my microphone. In playing music, the Xperia generally performed quite well, though not astoundingly, I would say. The sound, especially when turning on the Dolby Atmos feature, was generally quite nuanced and less tinny than the sound of the iPhone SE. The volume was decent, but in most scenarios, it did seem much quieter than the iPhone SE. Although when all the audio enhancement modes, such as the DSEE Ultimate option and the Dolby Atmos option were turned on, I did find that the Xperia was slightly louder than the iPhone SE when turned up to its maximum volume. The iPhone SE 2020's sound output was impressive for its small size and weight. However, it did always feel like it tended to be a bit louder than I would have wanted. Seriously, this thing just felt like loud was its default mode. For example, watch what happens when I played a game of Pocket Tanks on both phones. To try and keep things on a level playing field, I set each phone's volume to their lowest setting and then press the upward volume rocker button on each phone 5 times. Here's what each sounded like to the camera which recorded this footage. So, like I say, the SE's default sound option seems to be loud. Both phones proved capable at playing music, and both sounded generally pretty good. However, the iPhone SE 2020 speaker did sound very tinny and quite cheap quite often, at least in my experience. And I found this especially noticeable when I maxed the volume out on that device. Honestly, I felt that sometimes this actually hurt my ears to listen to. The Xperia 5ii, on the other hand, produced a lot more nuanced range of sound, although its chronic problem of being a little on the quiet side meant that I often had to turn up the volume quite a bit. In this test, I had both phones play the same piece of music at roughly half-level volume on each. Pay close attention to how each device produced its sound, and to the difference that the Dolby Atmos option and the DSEE Ultimate option make to the sound produced on the Xperia 5 Mark II. Take it away, boys! So, in a nutshell, I would say that in terms of general loudness at most levels, the iPhone SE is the most consistent winner. In terms of nuance and actual sound quality, I think that's where the Xperia 5 Mark II does much better than the iPhone SE. For the iPhone SE 2020, I also found that it was prone to some very noticeable audio glitches. For example, when playing a game of Pocket Tanks with the volume set to fairly low, watch what happened to the sound level on each of these phones when someone calls. Notice how the Xperia muted the game's background sound temporarily to notify you about the call? That's what I expected, and I think that's really what should happen in this scenario. Now, let's do the same for the iPhone SE and see how it handles this. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And yes, that's a glitch showing up on one of the latest versions of iOS, version 14.6 to be exact. However, the general system-wide loudness of the iPhone SE did come in handy for speakerphone calls. The sound on these was loud enough so that it was almost always easy to hear the other caller. For the most part, I'd say on a speakerphone loudness basis, the Xperia and the SE are roughly equal, but I'd probably give the iPhone SE a slight edge here, even if the sound is more tinny to my ears. One area where the iPhone SE does take the lead is in its microphone performance. The larger microphone holes at the bottom of the device just seem to pick up sound more clearly and from more directions and distances than the Xperia. This, again, is a fairly major part of the overall phone experience, and it is a fairly big win for the iPhone, and I feel a bit of a disappointment on the Sony Xperia. One of the most important characteristics of a modern-day smartphone is, of course, its screen. This is bound to be a little unfair in comparison because the Xperia 5 Mark II uses an organic light-emitting diode or OLED panel for its screen, and the iPhone SE is using an older liquid crystal display or LCD. Now, this isn't to say that either technology is better than the other, but OLEDs are known for being a bit more vibrant and dynamic than LCDs. The screen on the Sony Xperia 5 Mark II is beautiful. Colors are rich, vibrant, and images are detailed. The 5 Mark II comes with different display modes allowing you to choose between a standard display mode and what Sony calls Creator Mode. Sony claims that this mode uses image processing and a special color gamut on the device to more faithfully reproduce, and I quote, "the creator's intended vision." How Sony would know the creator's intended vision on any film or video you'd be playing on it is less fully explained. Nearby, you'll find options allowing the device to enhance the quality of the video played on the phone. The Xperia also features some increasingly standard options like having a dark theme option, making the backgrounds darker, and a night mode which can tint the screen to a more reddish hue to cut back on the amount of blue light one sees when using the device at night. Sony also gives the user the ability to custom tune the white balance on the device's screen, which is really quite impressive and will no doubt be enjoyed by more technical users of the phone. Something else that people out there will absolutely rave about, stomp up and down about, march in the streets about, is that the device supports a high screen refresh rate of 120 Hz. Sure, I think turning this on looks nice and does render a noticeable smoothing effect to flicking between apps and using the device, but it will also drain your battery at a faster rate, so most of the time I can certainly do without it on. If questioned which device I'd rather watch a movie on, despite the iPhone SE 2020's more than capable screen, I probably have to say the Sony Xperia 5 Mark II wins out here, which in a case of OLED versus LCD is probably not much of a surprise. The screen on the iPhone SE, while not quite as vivid and detailed as the Xperia 5 Mark II, certainly holds its own. I've never really been disappointed with its colors or viewing angles. The iPhone screen also overtakes the Xperia 5 Mark II in terms of screen brightness, so it has a better chance of being seen in direct sunlight. But if it's really bright outside, chances are neither will wow you with display readability. The iPhone SE 2020 also offers convenient selections like light and dark modes for the screen, automatic transitions between the two, and a feature called True Tone, which lets the phone detect the ambient lighting and shifts the on-screen colors to achieve a more consistent appearance across different lighting conditions. The iPhone SE 2020 also has a night shift mode, which does the same thing as the Xperia's night light mode, and shifts the screen to a more reddish color. The screen on the iPhone SE 2020 might be of an older vintage than that on the Xperia 5 Mark II, but it's still more than capable of doing the job it was intended to, and looks great. There are a variety of aspects of smartphone use that kind of defy categorization, but go a long way towards making use of those devices enjoyable. So I've decided to group these into a miscellaneous section. For a phone that tries so hard to be associated with a great film viewing experience, the Xperia falls quite flat in one big area: connecting it to a television or monitor. Yep, I suppose there's a reason Sony shows this guy sitting in a chair and watching on his phone. In my experience, he's going to have a bit of difficulty watching what I can only assume is another episode of a hipster beard tutorial on a larger screen. To describe the experience as disappointing seems like a vast understatement. I tried connecting the Xperia to a television and a computer monitor using 3 different USB-C to HDMI connectors from 3 different brands. Spoiler alert here, but all were disappointing. And before you ask, no, I hadn't had any previous issues with any of these USB-C to HDMI adapters with any other devices. By the way, the footage you're seeing is from my tests with an LG computer monitor. Now, firstly, there does seem to be a divide between certain types of content and how the Xperia tries to display these. For testing how the phone displayed somewhat older content, I decided to see how it would export an episode of Star Trek Voyager. Here the color and quality of the image is generally fine. The main issue I have with this is the size of the image that the Xperia pipes to the external LG display. Have a look at the big difference between how the Xperia and the iPhone SE 2020 exported the same episode to this monitor. The Xperia, despite giving the video a respectable amount of real estate on its own built-in screen, exports the show to only a small central portion of the monitor it's hooked up to. Compare this with the image the iPhone SE exports to the same screen. It's considerably larger and, I think, would be much more pleasant to watch. You can zoom in, but as you can see here, then the Xperia cuts off large areas of the picture. Maybe this has something to do with the tall and thin dimensions of the Xperia and its slightly non-standard display ratio, but whatever the reason, it's really disappointing. More disappointing still was my initial experience when trying to view newer content when exported from the Xperia. Here you're again seeing footage from my tests with the external LG computer monitor, and I'll prepare you for the results, which were shockingly awful. What you're seeing were my initial attempts to get the phone to export an episode of David Attenborough's Netflix series, Our Planet. You can see in the lower right-hand corner that the Xperia 5 Mark II itself is displaying the show beautifully, with all its rich and vivid colors on its own built-in screen. But the image it was exporting was, at times, so dim that it was barely picked up by the camera filming this. As I said before, I repeated this test several times on both a television and the computer monitor you're seeing here, and as I mentioned before, these terrible results persisted even when using 3 different HDMI to USB-C dongles on both external screens. By placing the footage of the Xperia 5 Mark II trying to export its image to the LG monitor right alongside the iPhone SE 2020 doing the same thing on the same monitor, the difference between the two becomes very clear. Now, at first, I thought going into the settings menu and switching the Xperia's display mode from standard to creator mode might make some difference. But as you're seeing in the footage on your screen now, that didn't seem to be the case. As you can see here, sadly it seemed to have no effect. I was about ready to pronounce the export capabilities of the Xperia as being jaw-droppingly awful when I noticed a setting hiding in the lower corner of the display mode options. Auto Creator Mode. Creator Mode is automatically applied to specific apps. Why? Now, I didn't at least knowingly ever turn this setting on, so I'm assuming that the Xperia probably came with this setting turned on automatically. If it did, that's a bit of a problem, because it essentially implies that the Creator Mode display setting was turned on all the time for certain apps on the phone, regardless of whether the overall display mode was set to standard mode or not. So, in desperation, I switched off this setting. As you can no doubt see, this made a world of difference to the image that the Xperia was able to export to an external screen. Words might fail my initial and unrehearsed reaction to first finding this out, so I think I'll let some uncut footage express my feelings in that moment. And a warning, mild profanity ahead. Shocking. Sony, did you ever shoot yourselves in the damn foot when you did that? Wow, okay. However, while the color, brightness, and vividness of the imagery displayed was improved massively, I still have big issues with the small area of the screen used to display it. Again, looking at the iPhone SE in a side-by-side comparison, this difference is pretty obvious, and again, disappointing. I also feel that the iPhone seemed to export brighter video to the monitor as well. Now, as I'm more of a novice using Android, I have to admit the possibility that there may be settings within the OS's many submenus that might correct these issues to some extent. But frankly, I don't think that's any kind of defense for Sony. A product at this price point, marketed to be so cinematically oriented, made by a company with decades upon decades of TV and home theater making experience, has absolutely no excuse for not making this feature simple, intuitive, and as easy as plug and play. To be absolutely transparent here, I only tried physical connections to a television and computer monitor's HDMI ports in these tests, not wireless methods like Chromecast. So that experience might be different, and frankly, I hope it is. The other point I should note is that the TV and computer monitor which I tested with both of these phones aren't exactly brand new 8K displays, but aren't exactly ancient either. The television screen was a roughly 2013 LG, and the computer monitor, also an LG, was from a few years before. So I can accept that plugging the Xperia 5 Mark II into a brand new 2021 display may produce different results, especially when considering recent advancements in both pixel display density and high dynamic range output technologies. However, I should point out that the iPhone had no trouble in outputting to the same LG devices immediately via its specialized connector, so I expect nothing less from the Xperia 5 Mark II. These are both 2020 era phones, after all. So both in terms of the ease of exporting footage off of the phone and the actual quality of the footage once it's exported to an external screen, I think I have to crown the iPhone SE 2020 the winner of this contest. One very important aspect of a modern smartphone is how easy it is to get information off the device. From my time with these devices, I can say that Sony's Xperia 5 Mark II and Apple's iPhone SE 2020, at least with the two units I had to test, represent two vastly different experiences. For the Xperia 5 Mark II, transfer off the device is relatively easy. Just plug in the transfer/charging cord and plug the other end into a computer with a USB-C port, and bingo, you have access to a variety of files on the device, including your photos and videos. It isn't perfect because I still can't access my notes made in the Color Notes app, for example, which would be nice. However, impressively, you have fairly easy access to downloaded files via simply plugging in the phone to a Windows computer. This is, very sadly, not the case with the iPhone SE. Just look at the stark difference between the folders available on the Xperia when plugged into a Windows computer and the options available on the iPhone. Having made that point though, when trying to use a video made in the Cinema Pro app on the phone, there were a few big issues. Transfer via the USB cord seems to go just fine, but playback was a little bit more uncertain. It played back just fine on one Windows computer I tried, but on another, this was the message I got using the exact same default Windows 10 Media Player program. Weird. The issue with the file created in the Cinema Pro app didn't really stop there. As you can see here, when I tried to put the file into my video editing program, it just didn't seem able to play it. To the extent that it couldn't even show me individual frames of the image. I don't really want to be the one to burst Sony's bubble, but if you're aiming this phone at media-savvy filmmakers and quote-unquote content creators, all of your media files just kind of need to be able to play back reliably and definitely be usable in video editing software. So I don't know what the issue is here. Now, whatever criticism Sony deserves for these, admittedly pretty big gaffes, I feel a more raging torrent of anger towards my experience with getting files off the iPhone SE. All you can access on the iPhone on a Windows computer without using iTunes are your photos and videos. No downloaded files, voice memos, or notes. Nope. For those you have to go to other options. Thankfully, there are other options such as downloading iTunes, emailing, texting, instant messaging, sending your files to a cloud storage service like Google Drive, or, in desperation, in the case of notes anyway, I guess you could screenshot these to turn them into photos that you could then access on the device. That's great, and I'm grateful for those options, but I'm not going to give Apple a pass on this one. I'm a firm believer that a device that you purchase shouldn't hide the content that you yourself created from easy access without using the manufacturer's own proprietary software. Software like iTunes, which I have never found easy to use and frankly vehemently dislike. The troubles for the iPhone don't end there. Upon trying to transfer off my photos and videos from the iPhone SE 2020 by simply plugging it into a Windows computer, it would begin to transfer just fine, and then this happened. Now, my older iPhone 6s eventually started doing things like this just before I stopped using it. But for the most part, transferring photos off it like this went pretty well. So for this to happen on a brand new iPhone, and so early in its usage, is way beyond disappointing. It's angering. If you're thinking this was some kind of one-off, it wasn't. I tried transferring the files over 3 different cords, all bought directly from Apple, and on 2 different Windows computers. Anyway, I'm relieved to tell you, dear viewer, that I think I found a way to correct this problem. You see, this issue eventually got so bad, I just figured I had no other choice but to shut off the iPhone and reboot it. Full disclosure here, but I realized at that time that it had been quite some time since I actually turned off the iPhone SE 2020 and then turned it back on. When I did power down the phone and turn it back on again, the change was dramatic. The phone was now able to transfer photos and videos to a computer without any issues popping up. So my advice would be that if you have an iPhone SE 2020, you may want to turn it off and on again every once in a while. So yes, thank heavens, this issue was actually resolved fairly easily. So why, if the phone works for its file transfers at the moment, am I mentioning this glitch? Well, that's pretty simple. Because it was a fairly huge glitch. And because that sort of thing just shouldn't happen on a very new phone. I don't care if the phone hadn't been turned off for several months. A simple interface of plugging the device's data transfer cord should always allow a user to retrieve their files easily. End of story. Period. You could argue that Apple optimized the iPhone to work best with iTunes software, and that's possible. But why, in 2021, am I forced to download proprietary software like iTunes just to access the files I have created on my own phone? Why not just be able to plug in the phone and have access to more than just photos and videos? Why can't Apple fix this problem after so many years? Now, is it remotely possible that both this specific Xperia 5 Mark II and this specific model of the iPhone SE 2020 happen to have shipped with some imperfection unique to these precise models? Yes, it is. However, I really don't think that's the case, especially in the case of the iPhone SE, because, as I mentioned before, I have observed my iPhone 6s showcasing similar malfunctions near the end of its use. The flashlight function of a phone is something that, if done right, you don't really think about much. You need a light to search for something? And bam, there it is, right on command. Both of the phones have this function, but one is the clear winner in my opinion. I'll start with the Xperia. It has a flashlight function. This feature is only accessible by either swiping down from the very tall top of the phone or by activating the shortcut through Sony's SideSense. But I found it rather dim. The iPhone's flashlight function definitely wins this contest in my opinion, both for ease of use, as it is much more easy to access this feature by swiping up from the bottom than from accessing it from the top or side like on the Xperia 5 Mark II, and customizability. On the iPhone SE, you can actually customize the brightness of the phone's flashlight LED. Which, I have to say, is already noticeably brighter than on the Xperia. Even at the iPhone's base level brightness. Another thing about the iPhone that irks me isn't news to many of you out there. For those who aren't aware of this, the iPhone SE 2020, the only iPhone left with a home button, doesn't really have what I would call a home button there per se. Since about the iPhone 7, Apple has replaced the physical button with this facsimile, which doesn't actually move. It's essentially a dent in the phone's casing that looks like a button. You still use it to control the phone the same way as one used to with all the previous home buttons on the iPhone. The difference is that you no longer press the button inward. One still presses down the same way, but instead of the physical subduction motion of the buttons of old, you instead get a slight haptic tap/vibration as feedback to signal that the phone has registered your input. I know, Apple almost certainly did this to increase the phone's ability to resist getting wet. The new interface isn't something I really love about the phone. However, that said, I did get used to this new interaction over time, and I definitely do appreciate that there is some kind of physical control surface left to control the phone. I personally think that it, along with the increased bezel space to accommodate it, helps a lot with decreasing false inputs when, for example, taking your phone out of your pocket. As you go through life, you start to understand that there are a few answers you'll probably be waiting a good long time to get, if ever. Why are we here? Are we alone in the universe? Does the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot really exist? Well, I'd add another question to that list. What on earth made Android decide that it could decide, better than I could, when it should allow me to take a screenshot? The Xperia 5 Mark II would simply not let me take screenshots when I was on certain apps, like banking apps, for example. I do understand that this is no doubt considered a quote-unquote safety feature, but it's kind of a creepy, dystopian science fiction safety feature. I'll make the determination what and what is not safe to screenshot or screen capture on my own phone that I bought with my own money. Thank you very much. This is, for me, one major point in the iPhone scorecard here, as it does allow you to activate the screenshot feature in banking apps and others. This feels weird to say, but thanks for the added freedom, Apple? You might recall I mentioned Sony's SideSense feature earlier as the way you access the one-handed mode. Of course, you can access many other useful features from this shortcut, including pretty much any app on the phone. It's a nicely thought out feature, and I've found it can be really useful to have around. One really impressive feature is that Sony actually lets the user move the white lines which activate this feature almost anywhere on the screen. So if you want SideSense on the other side of the screen, or even a small SideSense button sitting somewhere more towards the center, that, impressively, is possible. That's an example of Sony using foresight into what a user's needs might actually be. I have to say, that's pretty good work, Sony. I appreciate that this next point has been around on several Android phones for some time now, but it is such a breath of fresh air to a longtime iPhone user like myself that I have to mention it. The ability to connect a USB-C compatible thumb drive directly to the Xperia 5 Mark II and add and remove files from that device is extremely useful and very cool. This ability further blurs the lines between computer and phone and adds significant productivity benefits. You're out and about and need to quickly share a file with a colleague directly from your phone? You can do it! Want to back up files you have on a USB stick to your Xperia's microSD card? You can do it! Get a sudden urge to set an homage to a beautifully drawn but criminally obscure Warner Brothers cartoon character onto the phone as your stunning new custom wallpaper? Well, you can do that too. My point here is that the USB-C connector opens up a plethora of new options for connectivity to other devices. For a long-time iPhone user, it's quite nice to feel freed from the tyranny of Apple's proprietary Lightning connector. A small subset of you might see what I did there. Now, for this point, I didn't cover it in the main sound segment of this review because to experience it, you need some added peripheral that doesn't come with the phone. However, the fact that the Xperia 5 Mark II still features a built-in headphone jack deserves mention, and I believe considerable praise. While I feel the Xperia already did generally prove itself the better minstrel of the pair due to its more nuanced audio output, even if it was generally too quiet, adding headphones to the equation really moves it out in front. The sound quality you can get with a pair of headphones plugged into the Xperia 5 Mark II is definitely superior to anything the iPhone SE 2020 can pipe out of its onboard speakers. The sound is immersive and detailed, and closer to making you feel like you're actually there with the musician. I feel I should mention that while the iPhone SE 2020 doesn't come with any earbuds in the box or a built-in headphone jack, Apple and others do offer wireless earbuds and headphones that could very likely improve your audio quality on that device. But many of these options, and especially the Apple variety, are quite costly. In stark contrast, because the Xperia comes with a built-in headphone jack, I can plug in any pair of wired headphones I have sitting around and still considerably improve my audio experience with the device, for likely considerably less cost. There's also the fact that the headphone jack is also useful for potentially being able to transfer audio off the device as well. So I feel that the Xperia 5 Mark II's built-in headphone jack cements its overall lead on the iPhone SE 2020 in the sound category. Sony's phone, running Android OS, is the more customizable option and definitely gives the user a greater degree of freedom than the iPhone SE. Unfortunately, the trade-offs are Android's potential for piping aspects of your phone and internet usage data to Google, unless you specifically turn these off, and that the freedom Android gives you to make choices in customizing your phone might be enough to let you make the wrong choice. However, the Xperia 5 Mark II feels a little more daring and less cookie-cutter to me than the iPhone, and I actually think the phone just looks really elegant. Yes, even knowing all the issues that can arise from its tall, dark, and handsome design. Now, those of you leaning towards the Xperia 5 Mark II should be aware that its successor, the Xperia 5 Mark III, has recently been announced by Sony and is slowly starting to be rolled out. That phone seems to offer some notable improvements, such as a physical variable telephoto lens. Cool. Speakers on the phone itself which, supposedly anyway, can recreate the sound performance of Sony's 360 reality audio system, and a larger 4500 mAh battery. Given Sony's usual overly sluggish launch cycle, the Xperia 5 Mark II may still appeal to you with value propositions like, it's actually available to buy now, and because it's last year's model, now it costs slightly less. Apple's iPhone SE 2020 also can't claim to be perfect. While iOS may give the user more security, it can sometimes feel a little like your phone customization options are enforced with police state-like totality and opaqueness of logic. Too often in my day-to-day usage of iPhones has Apple felt less like a smiling benefactor and more like a greedy salesperson who's already got their foot in the door. However, the iPhone remains the all-reliable of the smartphone world. App selection in the App Store is overall less broad than what you'll find on Google Play, but you might feel just a bit more reassured that the apps you'll find there are potentially less risky thanks to Apple's more stringent control over which apps do or do not get to be featured in the App Store. Another thing is that sometimes Apple oddly just gets some things really right. The iPhone SE 2020, as of the posting of this review, hasn't had an official successor announced yet, so it's still the current SE model of the iPhone. I personally can't quite make up my mind with these phones in a definitive way. The excessively practical side of me says the iPhone's sheer reliability in certain key functions makes it the winner. But the amateur photographer, aesthetically inclined, artistic side of me really favors the Xperia 5 Mark II as the clear winner. But fortunately for you, you don't need me to make up my mind. Now you have an idea of what it really might be like to live with these phones, quirks and all. I hope you enjoyed the ride, and thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to encourage more Inktelligent videos.